Hey, before we jump into this interview, as you're about to hear Josh readily acknowledge, he sometimes uses derogatory words and profanity in his posts, and I don't endorse that. Of course, having someone as a guest on this show isn't an endorsement of every post, statement, or action they've ever made or will make. That said, I believe this conversation has tremendous value. It's a rare and deeply personal interview where Josh opens up about parts of his life and journey that he doesn't often discuss publicly. He speaks candidly about faith, identity, deception, personal struggles, spiritual transformation, multiple incredibly important themes. I invite you to listen with discernment and let the conversation speak for itself. Not all our thoughts are our own thoughts. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely believe it. And when I was bedridden and catatonic for a long time, both at 15 years old and at 21 years old, those were absolutely spiritual attacks and demonic attacks that were happening where my thoughts were no longer my own. And I would often articulate that to my parents. They'd say, "What are you feeling?" I said, "I feel like my brain has turned against me." Another way to say that is the devil is sending you false thoughts.
Hey folks, welcome to the Reality of the Delusion broadcast where we are doing three very important, vital things. We're recognizing deception, we're realizing our worth, and we are righting what's wrong. I'm Laura Gallier, author of the Delusion novel series. The feature film based on the novel is underway. Thank you to all of you who've gone to delusionseries.com and signed the registry in support of that. Having said all of that, I am so excited to introduce the Josh Seiter, who is here in Chicago. You probably noticed this is not my normal media studio. I wish it was, but I have traveled here to visit with Josh. And if you don't know him, you probably live under a rock, but that's okay. I'll get you caught up. I learned after our first conversation that you were on reality TV. I didn't even know that about you. I discovered Josh like 2.3 million other people have, which is on Instagram. And you have these videos that draw you in because they're funny. To me, it was very obvious from the get-go that you were acting, you're not really thin, and your acronyms, I don't know how people don't laugh. I don't even know how you don't laugh when you introduce yourself to people, but then you transition and suddenly the conversation shifts, not just from this social justice issue, but profound principles of truth. So I would love to know, how did you start to become, maybe it's been your whole life, just so passionate, it's very obvious that you are, about exposing lies with truth? Where did that come from, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the genesis of that was my dad. So I grew up with conservative Christian born-again parents in the 90s. I was born in 87, and my dad always had Rush Limbaugh on the radio. And so Rush was very big on pointing out the hypocrisy of the left, that the left often claims one thing but then does the complete opposite, or stands for a principle that contradicts their rhetoric. And so I always found that interesting. And then when I went to law school, we used the Socratic method in law school to kind of expose fallacies and to expose contradictions and to bring out the truth. And I am also a big believer in the marketplace, the free marketplace of ideas, that we should always have an open dialogue going, and that the worst thing we can do is shut down an open dialogue and free speech. And then with Charlie Kirk being assassinated for doing exactly that, literally bringing a literal free marketplace of ideas to campuses, I really saw the need to have open discussion and dialogue and expose hypocrisy. And so I guess you could say it was born from childhood and then elucidated throughout my young adult life. But I do think that a lot of the ideology of the left is pernicious. I think it's dangerous, and I think mockery and humor is a good way to expose it for what it is, which is a lie, and a dangerous lie.
Well, it's obviously resonating with a lot of people, but it was very kind of you because I messaged you. I saw an interview you were in, and you had a lot more substance than we could ever conclude from just your satire videos, right? And so I loved that, and I just knee-jerk messaged you that we have some common ground, and you messaged me right back, and we got to talk the very next week on a phone call, and something you said just really resonated with me. As a matter of fact, it's why we're here. I don't know that I would have even felt the need to initiate this, but you said, we are not in a culture war we are in a spiritual war. And I would just love for that to really be the main topic that we engage in today, because I don't hear you talking about that a lot, or you're not given the opportunity a lot in other interviews. And certainly my own conviction as we talk about truth and lies is that we bring it back to that ultimate unseen war. So tell me what you think that means when you say that, because maybe we're thinking two different things. What do you mean when you say we're not in a culture war, but a spiritual war?
Yeah, so if you're in a spiritual war, that is a harsh indictment. You are saying that literally lives are in the balance, and it's a good versus evil, Manichaean, black and white thing. And I truly believe that once you start mutilating kids with the imprimatur of medical doctors and medical professionals who are pushing gender ideology and gender transitions on young kids, you are in a spiritual war. It is no longer a culture war. You are in something bigger that transcends just a culture war. When I think of culture war, I think of the 90s. I think of wedge issues. I think of homosexuality. I think of immigration. I think of things like that. When you start chopping the body parts off of little kids, lying to them, allowing parents with Munchausen syndrome by proxy to put hormones in young children or hormone blockers, you have now entered a spiritual war. So what I mean by that is much bigger than the issues we were facing in the 90s. So I think that things have progressed and digressed and devolved into a much more serious state now in 2026 than they were in the 1990s. So I think the stakes are much higher, and that is what I mean when I say we're in a spiritual war. It truly is, to me, good versus evil. These people are demons, and if you need any proof of it, go to a local pride parade if you can stomach it and watch what they are doing in front of little kids, and then you will understand the gravity of it and what I mean when I say we're in a spiritual war.
I like that you use the word progression, because it's not that the stakes weren't high in the 90s, it's that it's progressed to such a point. We become so desensitized, and I use the word ignorant, honestly, in so many ways as a society, that it's come to us being allowed to mutilate children in the name of identity. And I want to unpack that more. But first, just to dial in even more, are you saying that you believe in the literal existence of a devil and demons, or do you consider that just to be symbolic?
It depends on your interpretation of the Bible. I personally take it literally. And so when the Bible says something, I don't think it's a suggestion. I take it literally, and that is just my interpretation of it. Anyone else is able to read into it what they want, but I personally believe there is a heaven and a hell. And I think that there is an afterlife, and that what we do here on earth determines where we end up in that afterlife. And I don't need other people to countenance what I'm saying or buy into it. That is just my own personal belief, and it instructs the views I have, and it instructs the things I say and do, and why I believe that what's happening now matters, not only for us and future generations, but for what happens to us after we leave this earth.
Well, good. And I do believe, of course, there's many scriptures that we could toss around and what exactly does this mean, but there are some that there is a right and a wrong way to interpret it. And what I mean by that is Jesus literally cast devils out. And so it's not a stretch to say that that's literal. And so to not believe in that, I believe, I'm going on record, would be not being intellectually honest about the Gospels and what we're told in scriptures, and how many times that Jesus himself spoke of a literal devil, even wrestled with him and quoted the word. And I feel the need to say this: the whole thing that Satan did was twist God's intent of the word. And so that's why I'm just circling back to say how we interpret is so important. But nonetheless, having said that, talk to me about this. So we know that there are ideologies in the earth, and you and I are in agreement that there are ideologies that align with God's word and what he says is good and right and true, and there are ideologies that contradict that and are even demonic in nature. There are arguments and philosophies in the earth that are demonic in nature. It plays out on the right or the left. So is it fair to, in a sense, demonize the left? Are you doing that because you're saying they tend to gravitate toward that, or do you see it as bigger than politics?
I do think it's bigger than politics, and I believe you can view this through a lens that is not religious, even if you're a non-believer. I think from a purely psychiatric point of view, and that is where I am also very passionate, maybe even more so than religiously. From a psychiatric point of view, I believe the principles and ideology of the left are noxious. And I'll give you an example why I think that. I think that when you start affirming and indulging faulty thinking instead of correcting faulty thinking, you are no longer doing the right thing. So in psychiatry for ages, especially cognitive behavioral therapy, we have always restructured faulty thinking. For example, when someone with body dysmorphia presents to a doctor and says, I think my nose is too big or my hand's too big, I want to chop it off. The doctor is medically required, and by the Hippocratic Oath is required to say, no, you should not chop it off, and you have a thought disorder called body dysmorphia that is leading you to believe that. When someone with schizophrenia comes in and says, I think the CIA is hiding in my bushes, the doctor is medically required to correct that faulty thinking and say, actually, no, they're not. You're suffering from a thought disorder. When someone comes in with anorexia and says, I am 63 pounds, I am too fat, I need diet pills and liposuction, the doctor is medically required to disabuse them of that false belief and correct it through cognitive behavioral therapy and restructuring those faulty thoughts. But if someone utters the magic words, I'm trans and I'm a man, but I think I'm a woman, the doctor is no longer required to disabuse them of that faulty thinking. They're actually now, according to most medical standards, required to indulge and affirm that faulty thinking. And then not only that, but provide them with medical care that is going to help them abuse and destroy and mutilate their body. So we do not indulge faulty thinking with any other thought disorder other than so-called gender dysphoria. And it allows doctors, medical professionals, parents, and the victims themselves to get away with things that would otherwise be criminal. And so I think from purely psychiatric point of view, what the left stands for is wrong and demonic, and that you don't have to be a believer in Christianity or any other religion to see why it is so noxious and why it is harming so many people.
Well, I agree with you because it is a delusion, and I will point to 2 Thessalonians says in the last day there will be a great delusion, and it's delusional, to your point, to check off on a lie. And I shared with you briefly that as a young girl, when I was little, I absolutely hated dresses, hated bows, anything feminine, and it wasn't a fashion statement. I truly felt intense anxiety and repulsed by it. I did not live in the day where I was asked, hey, you want to change your name from Laura to Larry and take hormones and the whole thing? And I would have been so susceptible, Josh, to someone saying, do you feel like you're trapped in the wrong body? That would have resonated with me. And yet now, as I pass through that, that's a whole other episode sharing that story that I'll get to someday. But when I came on the other side of that, it's so easy to look back and realize that I felt unsafe as a daughter of a single mom. Long story, lots of hard things growing up. And so I felt unsafe, and in my mind, femininity meant I couldn't kick your butt and protect myself. So again, validating something you said, the psychology, I had the wrong thinking. And instead of affirming that I want to be a boy, the most healthy question would have been, what is it about femininity that scares you, repulses you? And that's where the healing comes in. Because do you agree that you cannot want to be a different gender without rejecting your own, and yet it's under the label of tolerance, which makes no sense. So why this issue? Why do you think on other issues you're saying doctors know how to bring us back to reality, no, the CIA isn't after you? What is it about transgenderism that you think they're pushing so hard and it's getting under the radar and being allowed?
Well, I'll re-articulate what you said in a different way. You can't love yourself by mutilating yourself and destroying what you are. They're incompatible with each other. And I believe the impetus behind all of this, a lot of it is money. I think that Big Pharma makes tons of money by convincing thousands of children that they need to be on hormones for the next 60 years. Big Pharma is going to make a lot of money. And this is not the first time that they have convinced people that they need drugs and they need medicine to be happy, right? So this is a huge problem, and I think this is just another iteration of it. So Big Pharma benefits, doctors benefit, they get kickbacks from big pharma, and then parents, school teachers, and the media get to virtue signal, and they get to show how kind and compassionate they are, that they are indulging these people's delusions. It is not dissimilar from the body positivity movement, which harms the person struggling, but then everyone else involved gets to virtue signal and say, but look how kind and compassionate I am. There's nothing kind and compassionate about mutilating a child or telling a child that their faulty beliefs are true when in fact those beliefs are false. And so I think it is ultimately disrespectful to the victim, and I think it's like a hit of crack for everyone else involved, and they get to show how kind they are and how progressive they are, but ultimately it comes at the expense of that person. And I think it's very sad and it's very unfortunate, but I think it's money and I think it's the emotional high that everyone around that person gets when they indulge this faulty thinking and they affirm it. And I think the kind and compassionate and harder thing to do would say, no, ma'am, no, sir, you are not a woman. You're in fact a man, and I'm going to tell you why, and let's explore the reasons why you think you're a woman and why that's not true. That would be the kind thing to do, but it's harder to do that because you're not going to get the applause of the media and politicians. And so people just go, you know what? If I have to sacrifice my 8-year-old so that I can get some likes on Facebook by saying my 8-year-old's non-binary and trans, I'll do it. And sadly, that's the state of the world we're living in right now.
I think for some parents, it's exactly that. I think for other parents, I mentioned to you, they are terrified that their child's going to kill themselves. They feel like they're held hostage. I know a young lady who, every time her breasts start growing, because she's in puberty, they would do hormone blockers, and the mom thought she was saving her life. So there are those who are abusing it, and then there are those who just are grossly misinformed. And to those, I would say, if you're watching, I think it's so important to reiterate what we both said, which is the question is not, do you feel trapped in the wrong body? The question is, why are you rejecting? Why are you so afraid of being the sex that you are? Genetically, that cannot change, and to insinuate it can is delusion. I want to ask you, you have been through your own mental, emotional battle, so have I. I can relate to that. Would you share a little bit about what your journey has been like in that area? Because you're not talking about this just clinically when it comes to various struggles, correct?
Yeah, so I struggled most of my young adult life with depression and anxiety and pure OCD, which is OCD without the rituals. It's just thought OCD. And so I've been diagnosed with those things, and I've struggled with them since the age of 15. And it is because of my personal journey with mental health issues and the success I found in cognitive behavioral therapy that I am so passionate about why we should correctly treat people who are suffering from a thought disorder, and why I am so against gender ideology and why I think it's so noxious. And so I did struggle with anxiety and depression. I had catastrophic thinking about many things. I must be successful. I must get others' approval. I must do well, or else it is the end of the world. And cognitive behavioral therapy taught me to restructure that catastrophic thinking and to understand that even if something bad or negative happens, it is not the end of the world. And Stoicism is very similar to cognitive behavioral therapy. It says no event disturbs us. It's just our interpretation of that event or the emotional significance we lend that event that is upsetting us. And so when I found success in healing in cognitive behavioral therapy and went from someone who was catatonic and bedridden for a number of years to now being a very successful political creator and one of the most watched political satirists in the world, I became very, very, very passionate about why we must correctly treat thought disorders. And when I saw my own niece tell me that first she was bisexual, then she was a lesbian, and now she was a man, and I watched what she went through because of this odious ideology, that's when I became even more passionate about it. And I think we need to just let tomboys be tomboys. And there is a whole movement about that, that there are thousands of young girls who feel uncomfortable in their bodies, and they're just tomboys. It doesn't mean they're the opposite sex. Like most adolescents, they feel uncomfortable in their bodies. Similarly, there are tens of thousands of young boys who feel uncomfortable in their bodies. Feeling uncomfortable in your body as a young boy does not make you a woman. Being a young gay boy does not make you a woman. It makes you a young gay boy that feels uncomfortable in his body. And so it's interesting that the left always accuses the right of forcing kids to undergo conversion therapy. But who's practicing conversion therapy now when the left is trying to make thousands of young gay boys turn into women? I would accuse the left of practicing conversion therapy, and I think that is an issue that not enough people are confronting. And I think 30 and 40 years from now, history will look very critically on this period in the United States and say, shame on you for all the conversion therapy you practice and for turning these young kids who are just dealing with pedestrian issues of feeling uncomfortable in their body, shame on you for trying to convince them to become the opposite sex, which is something you can never do. It doesn't matter how hard you try. You will never be the opposite sex. The best thing you can do is just be yourself, and as you said, explore the reasons why you feel uncomfortable in your sex. That is the healthiest thing you can do.
Especially when it comes back to the fact that we are made in the image of God. I believe we all have his thumbprint. We all bear his image in different ways, unique ways. I know we can feel like we're just a face in the crowd, but I truly believe that. And so it's no wonder to me that identity is attacked. And I am not one to advocate that we blame the devil. We're responsible for our thoughts. We're responsible for our beliefs, and we have free will. But do you agree or disagree with me that that would be a definite point of that demonic attack, that you said you do believe in the demonic, that it would be to cause us to get as far as we can from our true identity, from who God intended us to be, that not all our thoughts are our own thoughts? Do you agree with that has a piece in the conversation?
I absolutely believe it. And when I was bedridden and catatonic for a long time, both at 15 years old and at 21 years old, those were absolutely spiritual attacks and demonic attacks that were happening where my thoughts were no longer my own. And I would often articulate that to my parents. They'd say, "What are you feeling?" I said, "I feel like my brain has turned against me." Another way to say that is the devil is sending you false thoughts. And the best thing you can do as a medical professional is to try to help that helpless, vulnerable person understand that those thoughts are faulty. The worst thing you can do is to affirm those thoughts. And my situation got so bad that I ended up having electroshock therapy done when I was 21 years old. And I had that done at Provena Hospital in Urbana, Illinois. And that is one of the most serious treatments that anyone can ever undergo on earth when it comes to depression and anxiety, is electroconvulsive therapy or electroshock therapy, and I had it done. And so again, it comes from my own experience with faulty thoughts and my ability to overcome them with cognitive behavioral therapy that I am so passionate about why we need to correctly treat these people. We owe it to the most vulnerable people in our society, especially when those vulnerable people are children, to help them rather than exacerbate their situation. And so that's why I think it's important to explore the reasons why they feel like they're born in the wrong body instead of affirming that they are born in the wrong body. And kids are so suggestible and open to suggestibility. Right. Thousands of studies have been done on this. If a trusted adult suggests something to a child, the mere suggestion of it can be internalized by the child and cause them to believe that thing to be true. And so we have to ask, how many kids who never would have considered that they were born in the wrong body are now considering it simply because an adult suggested it to them? And that thought scares me, and I thank God that you did not go through your struggles now, because who knows how many adults would have suggested that you were born in the wrong body.
There's no question. There's no question. And I believe people who are listening right now are hearing hope in your story, that I think you'd agree that all of us, it's a daily, even hourly battle in a sense, to be careful what we're thinking about. We're told to take thoughts captive biblically. We're told that. How do you walk out your mental, emotional health today? How are you doing First of all, how are you doing now? I know you said I'm doing great, I'm successful, and that's amazing. No one's taken that away from you. How are you doing personally now at this point in your life?
I do good with the help of cognitive behavioral therapy and recognizing my faulty and catastrophic thinking and restructuring it. That is very helpful. I'll tell you what else is. Fitness is very helpful. Yeah. Being in nature is very helpful. Having a supportive network of family and friends is helpful. Watching, as you said, the thoughts and images that I put in my head is very helpful. I find many things therapeutic in addition to fitness. I find reading, but fitness for me since the age of 17 has been very therapeutic for me. I think getting out, working on yourself, releasing endorphins, those are all very helpful things, and that has been a staple of my therapy and my recovery for about 20 years now, and I still go to the gym every single day, and I think it's very important. But aside from that, having a purpose or passion is very important, and there is a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl survived being in a concentration camp for a number of years, and he attributes what helped him survive the worst conditions on earth, being fed only a quarter piece of bread every day, having to dig holes in frozen earth for 15 hours a day, and nothing but wooden shoes and rags. What helped him survive years of that was having a passion, which were his journals and his work that he was working on. And so Viktor Frankl says that having a purpose or passion imbues us with a sense of meaning in our life, and it helps us get out of bed every day. And I really took that to heart when I read the book. And so me being able to satirize current political events and being able to use my platform to spread truth imbues me with a sense of purpose and meaning in my life, and that also has been very instrumental in my recovery along with fitness.
Well, and I feel like we've come full circle because we're talking about having that purpose and meaning, and that's the very thing that comes under attack when we drift or drastically move away from our God-given identity, right? We are going to lose our purpose, so they're so interconnected. Talk to me about February 27, 2026. Do you know what post you posted that day? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, that's when I became a believer again after years of not being one.
Talk to me about that. What happened? What led to that? You went public?
Yeah, so I want to contextualize it a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a very strict Christian conservative household. I had two born-again parents. My mother is Jewish ethnically and culturally, but she was a born-again Christian when she met my dad at a Christian retreat actually in Galveston, Texas. In the 70s. And so I grew up in a very conservative household, and me and my two older brothers were homeschooled our entire lives until college. My older brothers were pulled out of public school in 1992 because my parents saw that they were already being taught things that my parents thought were inappropriate. Now, this was 30 years ago, and my parents already saw this kind of what we would describe now as woke ideology creeping into the public schools. So they did what almost no one was doing in the early 90s, and they homeschooled all of us. And so I had a strict religious upbringing. I had to go to Bible study every Friday. I was homeschooled. I never went to a prom. I never went to a homecoming. I never ate in a cafeteria. I never had a locker. I never did any of those things. And so because of the draconian-like religious upbringing I had, I rebelled a little bit when I became 18 and I went off to college. And I slowly, at a liberal arts college, became liberal. And I not only abandoned Christianity and absconded from it, I also became a diehard, bleeding heart liberal. And it took me getting into my 30s and then seeing what was happening with the rioting across America after George Floyd and seeing the lockdowns and all of that and the anti-police sentiment that I came back towards the center right. And then during that time, I started reading the Bible again. And then in February, I made the post that I was sitting in my bed and I was reading the Bible and I was listening to the birds chirping, and I just realized that everything is so much bigger than we are. Me and you talking today is great, But this is just a small piece of a much bigger thing, that spiritual warfare we were talking about. And we were just a small part of that. And so it was understanding that the more popular I got online, the less important I was, and the more I was just a piece of something bigger. That crystallized to me, and it became more clear to me that, hey, this life isn't about me, Josh Seiter. This life is about things that are so much bigger than me, and they're not just political issues. They're not just wedge issues. It's not just about trans and immigration and homosexuality and left and right and Republican and Democrat. It's about eternity. It's about good and evil. And so that was very instrumental in me realizing that I am a believer in Jesus Christ and just coming back to what I was always raised in. And I understand, and I'm starkly aware that many people go, well, you were raised Christian, so that's the only reason why you're a Christian now. If you had been raised in a Muslim household, you would have believed in Allah. And I'll save that for a different day, because I think there's some good counter arguments to that. But it has come full circle, Laura, because it was my realization that we are in a spiritual war, and I am not important, and I am being used by God to bring out the truth, along with many other people that made me realize that Jesus is real. So, and I am not important. If I can be used by him, great. But I am not important, and I think people overestimate how important they are, and they think they're much more important than they are. This life is going to end for us in 40 or 50 years max, and we will be gone. We're on a rock floating through space, and we are nothing more than that. And once we're gone, but we have a spirit. And there is truth, and there is good and evil, and there is God's word. And so I think the best thing we can do with our time here is further God's word, crystallize God's word, elucidate it for other people, and bring them to the truth of Jesus.
Well, I love that, and what a paradigm, because on the one hand, we're not the most important, like you're saying, we're small, God is big, and on the other hand, Josh, you are so priceless and invaluable, and so is everybody else. And so it's that, finding that middle ground there of how to communicate that we're worth so much, but we're not better than everybody. That balance.
And I do know that balance, and one thing I love, again, going back to cognitive behavioral therapy, is it teaches that we are not worthy because of our acts or our performance. Our worth is not conditional. We have intrinsic, inherent worth because we are human beings. A tree does not have value. A blue sky does not have value because of what it does. It does not have to do or perform anything. It has value because it exists. Likewise, humans have value and worth merely because of their existence and because they are a human. And so to everyone out there struggling, you do not have to do anything to earn that worth. You are priceless, as you said earlier, priceless merely because you exist. You have intrinsic, inherent worth because you were created in the image of God, and that makes you invaluable and it makes you priceless, and I hope everyone realizes that. And because of that, you should not mutilate your body, and you were not born in the wrong body. You just have to understand and intuit your worth as you are now.
You took the words out of my mouth, because I was going to mention that I love the analogy of the sky and the tree. Great analogies. But we are made in God's image, and those things are made by him, but we're made in his image. So I'm so glad you said that, and that our viewers and listeners got to hear that. My question for you, you have posted twice that I know of. One time you're like, I am out of here. I'm not going to be posting content because I really want to focus on politics. I know I see flyers. You're going to be doing more and more political things, which I know you're very passionate about that. It's obvious. But then you did keep making content, and then you recently posted and said, like, hey, I'm taking a break. I'm doing some things for wellness, which is a very broad term, so I didn't know exactly what that meant. But I thought, is he really going to be able to resist posting? And sure enough, and a lot of people were very glad, many hundreds of thousands of people were glad that you kept posting. But what is your intent? What's up with those, like, hey, I'm out of here, and then you repost? What's going on with that?
Well, at the time, I'm always honest about how I feel in a moment. I'm always bluntly honest, even if it makes me look insensitive or like a bigot, or a right-winger or whatever it is. I'm always very honest about how I feel. So when I make a post, it's truly how I feel in that moment. Now, our feelings are ephemeral and they change. And sometimes my feelings change, and sometimes I do feel, you know what I need to do for my mental health is detox from social media, go off the grid. I need to just take a break from this. And then oftentimes I don't feel that way 24 hours later. And then I will make a post. And so it is fair that many people will say, well, that's contradictory. You said you were going to take a break, and now you're right back to posting. And I will say that, when you have, millions of followers and you are able to speak to a lot of people because of a large platform, it is very hard to stay silent. And so even though I feel like, hey, for my mental health, I need to just detox off of social media, usually within 24 hours, I'm like, I see something ridiculous, usually on the left, that I have to confront, but even issues on the right. And now we have seen the emergence of the woke right. And I don't want to dodge your question. I think I sufficiently answered it, but now there's an issue with the woke right, where the woke right is kind of attacking the rest of the conservative movement. And I believe with Candace Owens in the rise of her cult, there are a lot of people that are buying into lies. And I see these lies coming from the right as being just as noxious as the lies coming from the left. And so there's a principle that's called the horseshoe theory. And it says that the extremes on the right and the extremes on the left actually are very close and identical to each other. And they bend kind of like a horseshoe. And so you have, the right and the left are very far from each other at the bottom of the horseshoe, but then at the top, the very extremes, they are almost identical. And so with the emergence of the woke right, I have seen a lot of things that I want to call out and I want to criticize, and that is when I came back from my little 24-hour break from social media to mock the people that are saying that Charlie Kirk was killed by his own organization. They're saying he was killed by Erica Kirk, that it was Israel and the Jewish state that helped have Charlie Kirk murdered. And I really feel strongly that, again, this is a very noxious ideology and I want to take it on. So that's when I kind of came back.
That was not a publicity stunt. That was you being honest and just walking this journey out. I also love what you said about the horseshoe principle, and that's why I keep bringing it back. No disrespect to your platform in politics. Somebody needs to be championing that. But for me, it's so much bigger than politics, and I know we agree on that. It's just my calling, my lane, my purpose is to keep drawing it back to that spiritual war and ultimately back to the heart of God, because at the end of the day, He loves us. He wants us to know Him, but He wants us to know Him in truth. He wants us out from under the power of the enemy, and all these things are relevant to what we're saying. Having said that, do you feel like you have a sense of what your strongest spiritual gifting is, the way Scripture defines it? Or would you say, I'm not sure about that?
I think a gift I have is to not follow the crowd. Ever since a very young age, and I attribute this again to my parents, is I was always different. I was the one homeschooled kid in a town where no one else was homeschooled. And so I have always kind of been true to how I feel. And, a lot of people have accused me of, being a weirdo or being this and that because I don't do what everyone else does. I'm, again, very honest and open about how I feel. I don't care if that goes along with what everyone else is saying. I was one of the first people on social media to mock and deride gender ideology 2 years ago when no one else was doing it on social media. And so I think my gift is to, be true to who I am, not care about other people's judgments, and at the end of the day, to be a leader and not a follower. And I'm still human. I'm just a human. I'm just, again, a human on a rock floating through space. But I think people value what I have to say. I think I have a unique perspective because I come from a conservative Christian homeschooled upbringing. And as long as people want to listen to me, I'm going to talk. And I would attribute all of that to God, going back to what my greatest spiritual gift is. It would go back to God, and it would go back to my parents instilling that to me due to their belief in God and their belief in the Bible as well. So I attribute it to God and my parents.
Well, I love that. And I would just say everything you said lines up in the context of Scripture when the Bible talks about how there's giftings of apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers, evangelists, and everything you just said, having a passion for the truth, being bold, even that propensity to mock. Some people would say that's very unspiritual, and I get that. I understand the call to be loving, but that is all indicative of a prophetic person. We think of prophecy as predicting what's going to happen. Even that was in the context of God's prophets warning people of God's heart and judgment, or telling them the good news of blessings. And I said all that to say that someone who is so outspoken and gets so defensive and protective of the truth, that is indicative of a prophet. And I don't know if you've ever even seen that in yourself. And the way it works is we can use it for God or not with God. We can get very arrogant and harsh whenever we get out from under God with that gifting, but we'll have the gifting either way. And so I just wanted to tell you that I see that in you, and do with that what you want. But it's important, and we need prophetic people. And a final question for you, and then of course I'll invite you to say anything else that you want to share. Democrats, do you love the Democrats? Do you love the left?
Yeah, I love everybody. I grew up in a very lower middle class neighborhood, so our neighborhood was mixed. It was a melting pot. It was almost a cross section of America. We had my best friend Emron, who was Pakistani, who lived four doors down. We had a Taiwanese family that lived across the street. We had a Chinese family to the left, and then we had 50% of our neighborhood was African American. And a lot of those people I know now are Democrat voters. Just by the data and the statistics, 90% of them would have to be Democrat voters. And we also had an Israeli family, Habib, who lived 2 doors down. And because I grew up in this lower middle class melting pot of different families with different races and ethnicities, a lot of them were Democrats, and I loved those people then, and I still love them now. They are not our enemy. I know the media tries to divide people and create acrimony by telling us, telling gay people that Republicans are their enemy, telling trans people that MAGA's their enemy, telling black people that cops are their enemy. I don't buy into that. That's all propaganda. If you tune out and disengage from the media and social media, and you just go out into the world, you find that 99.9% of people, regardless of their political affiliation, regardless of their race, are great people, and you get along with them, and you probably have a friend group that is already 50% across the aisle from you anyways. 50% of my friends are probably Democrats, and I don't even know it. And so I'm not one of those people that is like, oh, the left is my sworn enemy. Oh, Democrats are my sworn enemy. No, that is a fiction created by the media to stir up acrimony and get clicks. If there is not infighting, if there are not wedge issues people are fighting over, no one's gonna click on these news articles. And the media are all publicly traded companies. They all are on the stock exchange. They all need to make a profit. They are not in the business of peddling the truth. They are in the business of stirring up hate, stirring up division. And this goes all the way back to the 1600s when you had indentured servants and their masters in America. And the masters knew if the black and white indentured servants continued to be friends, those indentured servants would buck and rebel against the masters. So the masters realized if they could divide us by race and say, hey, white indentured servant, that black indentured servant isn't actually your friend, and I'm not your foe. I'm actually your friend, and that black indentured servant is actually your enemy. They have been using race and all these other issues to try to get us to hate each other so that we don't find commonality and bond together against the elites that are ruling the world. And there are elites that are ruling the world. That is something that is very real. There are This is a class issue. There are billionaires in military, corporate, and government elites. They're all friends, no matter their political affiliation. They are running everything. They are all buddies. And whether they're serving in public office in the government or the private sector that they claim to regulate, they are all friends, and there's a revolving door. And what they have to do so that we don't recognize that we're being oppressed and screwed over by elites, what they have to do is create division among us. And they do that through race, identity politics, and everything else. And I am someone that does not buy into that. I do not think a black guy is my enemy. I don't think a Democrat is my enemy. I don't think a leftist is my enemy. I don't think a transgender person is my enemy. I may think someone is mistaken. I might think they hold fallacious beliefs, but they're not my enemy. The enemy are the corporate, government, and military elites that are conspiring together to destroy this country and get everything out of it that they can. And to do that, they have to create division. And the media is aiding and abetting them in that goal. And I think it's egregious, and I think it's disgusting. And so everybody is my friend. And I think if someone holds the opposite beliefs of me, I shouldn't hate them. I should just want to talk to them and proselytize to them. And that is why I'm a big believer in the open marketplace of ideas, the free marketplace of ideas. And what kind of crystallized that for me was going to law school. And in law school, you become a very big defender of the First Amendment and people's right to free speech. And John Milton and John Stuart Mill are the ones who created this kind of idea that America thrives when you have open dialogue and freedom of speech. And Oliver Wendell Holmes was a Supreme Court justice who also believed that it was important to have freedom of speech with some limits when it came to hate speech. And because I went to law school, and because of my worldview, I am also a very big believer in open dialogue and freedom of speech. And it's why I respected Charlie Kirk so much, because again, he literally brought a literal free marketplace of ideas to campuses and gave a microphone to his foe and said, you have ideas that are the opposite of mine and are diametrically opposed to mine. Here's a microphone. Why don't you tell me what they are? That is not being a fascist. That's not being a Nazi. That is embodying everything that America was founded on, which was this free marketplace of ideas in the First Amendment. And so I am a big believer in that. And so nobody is my enemy. They can just be a polemical foe that wants to go against me and stand across the aisle and has different beliefs than me, but they're not my enemy. My enemy are the corporate, government, and military elites that have no respect for this country, want to screw this country over, and want to do it so that they can get a 12th yacht in the ocean. And that's my enemy.
Gotcha. And you probably know where I'm going with this, but Ephesians 6 says that our enemy isn't people, not that those people are not worthy of being called out as being a detriment to society in a major way, but ultimately, I'm going to circle it back, of course, to the fact that our ultimate enemy is the devil. He really is, and people are under his influence or they're under God's influence, so there is a grace to cross over as we have both experienced. So. Well,
and I think the Bible talks about how the devil audibly would screech and scream when confronted with, with truth. It would screech out. And when I watch the histrionics of the left and how they act when someone on the right says something very simple or says something biblical, they often literally screech out. It's very similar to what you see happening in the Bible with people possessed by demons. They scream out and shout out, and it seems totally disproportionate to what's going on. It's like, whoa, I just made a statement. Why are you screaming? You have to understand, it's what you said. These people are literally possessed. It's demonic. And that goes back to what we said earlier, that this is no longer a culture war. It's a spiritual war. And when you understand it that way and you situate it in that back context and with that backdrop, you understand now why the left, when you make a very simple statement like, deranged men are not women, they start screaming out. Why, Laura? Because they're demonically possessed. But again, to everyone out there that's not a believer, you don't have to be a believer to agree with what I'm saying. from a purely psychiatric point of view and lens, what I'm saying is objectively true. Deranged men are not women. Women are not men in lipstick. And so no matter if you're seeing it through a religious or a psychiatric point of view, or just from a view of truth, I hope most people understand that what we're saying is not offensive. It doesn't make us a fascist. It doesn't make us a Nazi. It's just the truth. And if someone has a problem with that, they need to look inside themselves why it's causing such a problem.
And this, I really will end, because I could talk to you for days, but you will look at someone and you will say they are retarded, and you're doing that because I don't want to put words in your mouth. My impression is that you're just so feeling such, I'll call it righteous indignation even, over the atrocity of the philosophies that they're saying.
Yeah, I use hyperbole a lot to make a point, and I think oftentimes having a sane conversation with an irrational person is impossible. And when a rational conversation with an irrational person is impossible, the next most effective thing you can do is use satire and mockery. And that is just my personal belief, and that is why I use words like retarded, and sometimes I will use profanity. It is not just throwing it in gratuitously. It is used it's used very intentionally and very purposefully, because I believe in a very short amount of time, mockery can accomplish in 30 seconds what a 25-minute conversation can't accomplish with an insane person. And so sometimes we have to go to these alternative approaches when people are no longer able to engage in this dialectic, this open dialogue. When they can no longer do that, you have to start using mockery and derision. And not everyone's going to agree with that, but I think it's effective, and the fact that so many people enjoy my videos, I think shows that it is effective and confirms that. So.
Well, I appreciate you explaining that, and I appreciate you being here today, and I'm just so grateful that you responded to my DM and that we got to have this conversation, and so I appreciate it. Is there anything else you would want to say at all?
I would just want to encourage people, one of the things that has been most instructive for me that I learned was the best way to get rid of false beliefs and to bring out and expose a false belief is not through censorship. I think a lot of times our initial gut reaction is, what they're saying is false, we need to censor it. And obviously we saw that a lot, without getting too political, with Biden. The Biden administration pressured Google and YouTube and X and Facebook and Meta to censor things they did not like. And going back to John Stuart Mills and Oliver Wendell Holmes and Charlie Kirk, the best way we can beat and overcome a false belief is not through censorship, but through open dialogue. And so I hope we can continue that, and I think me and you sitting here today is a great manifestation of that, of open dialogue, and I'm always open to debate and talk to people. I think the best thing you can do is talk to people with opposing worldviews. I think you're kind of preaching to the choir when you only talk to people that have a similar worldview. I would encourage everyone out there, go talk to someone who has a different worldview, and I think you'll find out that you actually have a lot more in common with them than you initially thought, because again, the media and politicians, they are incentivized to try to convince us that everyone holds these extreme polarized ideas, and that's actually not the case. 99% of us, I think, or 90% of us live in this median where we're almost pretty similar on our beliefs, but I think the media and politicians convince us that we have just total opposite beliefs, and that all Democrats want to mutilate kids and all Republicans want to storm into houses and, kidnap immigrants. And I think we actually have a lot more in common than we think. And the only way we'll know that, Laura, is if we talk to people who have different beliefs. So I would just encourage everyone to go out there and do that. And that's what I do. And I'm always open to do that. And so if you're out there and you have a belief that's different than mine and you want to talk about it, I'm happy to do it. That is what America's about. That's what America has always been about. And I think we have to further that ethic, and I think we have to respect that ethic, that America is about democracy and America is about open dialogue and our First Amendment freedoms.
I love that. And really, it's the difference between legalistic religion and grace. We can have these conversations when we have a grace mindset. I will continue with this podcast on the topic of mental emotional torment. That's the series I'm on. You can learn more at lauragallier.com. Josh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And there you have it, a very timely conversation as we continue our series, Real Relief for Mental Emotional Torment. And our next episode will address the all-important issue of toxic jealousy. If you don't want to miss that, be sure and follow, subscribe, join the Reality of the Delusion community. I always like to conclude with a reflection question, so give this some prayerful thought. How do you believe the battle between good and evil is playing out in your own life, and how are you responding? Again, how do you believe the battle between good and evil is playing out in your own life, and how are you responding? Give that some careful consideration, and I'll see you next time. God bless.